All right, let's dive into something pretty fundamental for the CCSP exam and for how the cloud works in general, virtualization.
You're absolutely right. You can't really grasp the security of cloud computing without a good grasp on virtualization. It's kind of like trying to write a novel without knowing the alphabet.
So for those of us still working on that cloud alphabet, what exactly is virtualization?
Well, imagine you have this really powerful computer. We'll call it the host. This host runs special software called a hypervisor.
Ooh, a hypervisor.
And this hypervisor, it's like you can think of it as like a digital landlord, I
A
guess.
digital landlord, okay.
Yeah, carving up the host's resources and renting them out to virtual machines. We call them VMs.
Okay, so VMs. So it's kind of like if we were to use a food analogy, it's like taking one giant pizza, you're slicing it up so everybody gets a piece.
Exactly. Each VM is like a separate computer
Ah, okay.
with its own operating system, its own applications, but they all share the resources of that one powerful host.
Okay, so it's like they all get their own mini pizza, but they don't realize they're sharing the same oven or something like that.
That's a great way to put it. And here's the really interesting part. The operating system on each VM, it's completely unaware that it's actually running on a virtual machine.
Wow, that's clever.
Mm.
Now, you mentioned this hypervisor, this digital landlord. Are there like different types of landlords out there, different types of hypervisors?
There are two main types.
Okay,
Type 1, sometimes it's called bare metal,
the bare metal. Okay.
and Type 2. Think of Type 1 like if you were building a house, it's like building it directly on a solid foundation.
Okay.
It runs directly on the hardware. There's no middleman. So this is what you see a lot in data centers where performance and security are top priorities.
So it's like cutting out that extra layer going straight to the source.
Exactly. Then you have Type 2. Type 2 is more like building your house on top of an existing structure. So it runs on top of an existing operating system. So like when you run VirtualBox on your Windows laptop to experiment with Linux.
Right. Yeah. So I can run all those different operating systems without having to buy a whole new computer.
Exactly.
That's how that works.
But here's a question that pops into my mind, especially as someone who is prepping for this CCSP exam. If everything is sharing resources on the same host, doesn't that create a whole bunch of security risks?
That is a critical point. You're absolutely right. While virtualization offers some amazing benefits, it does come with its own set of security challenges.
Okay, so let's get into it. What are some of the security concerns when we're talking about virtualization?
Well, one of the scariest ones is VM escape.
VM escape.
Yeah, so imagine an attacker finds a weakness in that hypervisor. Remember we talked about it being like the foundation of the building? So it's like a crack in that foundation. And if they can exploit that, they could potentially break out of their VM, gain access to the host system, or even other VMs running on that same host.
That sounds terrifying. So it's like someone in an apartment building figuring out how to break out of their apartment, and then suddenly they've got access to everybody else's units in the building. That's a great analogy, and that's why hypervisor security is so important. Keeping your hypervisor patched and updated is absolutely crucial.
Makes sense.
But there's another security beast we need to tackle, and that's VM sprawl.
VM sprawl. So is that like when my closet gets so full of clothes I can't even find anything?
It's kind of similar, but instead of clothes, it's virtual machines.
Okay.
Because creating VMs is so easy, it can lead to a situation where you have hundreds or even thousands of VMs
Oh, wow.
scattered across your network, some forgotten, some unused, and many likely unpatched.
It's like digital hoarding, but with servers instead of shoes.
You got it. And just like a hoarder's house is a fire hazard, VM sprawl creates a massive attack surface for hackers.
Okay, I'm starting to see why this is such a big deal for cloud security. We've got this VM escape where attackers are trying to break out, and then we've got this VM sprawl where we're essentially creating a digital jungle of servers.
You got it. And understanding these challenges and how to mitigate them is essential for anyone working with cloud technologies, especially for acing that CCSP exam.
Absolutely. All right, so we've covered some of the basics and some of the security concerns, but we're just getting started. We'll talk about securing these virtualized environments in part 2 of this deep dive, with a focus on strategies that'll help you conquer those CCSP exam questions.
Welcome back to our deep dive. Last time we were peeling back the layers of virtualization and looking at the security challenges, but now let's get practical. How do we secure these virtualized environments, especially with the CCSP exam on the horizon?
Yeah, that's the big question, right? We talked about VM escape and VM sprawl, but what are some actual steps we can take to mitigate these risks? What should people be thinking about for the exam?
Well, let's start with VM escape. Remember, that's where an attacker is trying to break out of their VM, trying to get to the host system or to other VMs. The first line of defense there is securing the hypervisor itself.
Right, so making sure that digital landlord is keeping a close watch on everything.
Exactly. Keep your hypervisor software updated. You always want the latest security patches. It sounds simple enough, but it's amazing how often this gets overlooked. You can think of each patch as like reinforcing the walls of your building, making it harder for attackers to break through.
Makes sense. So update, update, update. Is there anything else we can do to stop that VM escape?
One of your best friends here is the principle of least privilege.
Least privilege, okay.
Only give your VMs the bare minimum access they need to actually function. That way, even if an attacker does manage to compromise a VM, the damage they can do is limited.
Yeah, it's like damage control. So are there security tools designed for virtualized environments that can help us out with this?
Absolutely. Think of it like installing security cameras and motion detectors in your building, intrusion detection systems, anti-malware software, virtual firewalls. These are all key parts of a good security approach for virtual environments. They'll help you detect and respond to suspicious activity.
That's reassuring. Now, what about that VM sprawl we talked about? How do we clean up that mess? It seems kind of overwhelming.
It is a challenge, but it's not impossible. The key here is visibility. You need to know exactly what VMs you have, where they are, what they're doing, who has access to them.
So it's like we have to become virtual detectives and track down all these rogue VMs.
Precisely. You want to implement a solid VM lifecycle management process. Track the creation, the deployment, the decommissioning of every single VM. Regular audits, security assessments, those are also crucial to find and address any security risks that might pop up because of VM sprawl.
Okay, so we're keeping a close eye on all our virtual tenants and making sure they're not causing any trouble or overstaying their welcome.
That's a great way to put it. An unmanaged VM is just a security breach waiting to happen. Don't let the dust settle.
All right, so we've got our hypervisor security under control, least privilege in place, security tools set up, and we're taking care of VM sprawl. Is there anything else we need to worry about?
You're hitting all the right points. But there's another concept, a really powerful concept, that's especially important in the cloud. Ephemeral computing?
Oh, yeah, that's right. It's that whole self-destructing server idea.
Exactly. Remember how we talked about servers sitting idle and wasting resources, potentially becoming vulnerable over time? Well, with ephemeral computing, you spin up a server, you use it, and then poof, it's gone. No vulnerabilities hanging around, no wasted resources.
It's like renting a car for a road trip.
Yeah.
You use it, you return it, you don't have to worry about maintaining it or securing it long term.
Exactly. You're constantly refreshing the environment, making it harder for attackers to find their way in.
So it's kind of like a self-cleaning oven. I like it. Now, before we move on, can we talk about virtual desktop infrastructure, or VDI, for a minute? You mentioned Amazon Workspaces as an example. How does VDI fit into all this?
Of course. VDI is essentially delivering virtual desktops to users over a network. Instead of having applications and data on individual devices, everything lives in a central environment, usually in the cloud.
So it's like I've got a powerful computer in the cloud that I can use from anywhere.
Exactly. And there are big security advantages to that. Like if a user loses their device or it gets stolen, sensitive data isn't compromised because it wasn't stored on the device itself.
Oh, yeah. So it's like my work brain stays safe even if my device goes missing.
Exactly. Plus, VDI environments can be tightly controlled, carefully monitored, allowing companies to have stricter security policies and better protection against threats.
Okay, so VDI is another tool we can use with central control and better data protection. But how does that work in practice? What are some things to keep in mind when we're securing these VDI environments?
That's a great question, and it leads us perfectly into our next segment where we'll really break down the details of VDI security.
We're back for the final part of our virtualization and cloud security deep dive. We've covered a lot of ground, but right before the break, we were starting to get into securing those virtual desktops in the cloud. What do we need to keep in mind when we're trying to secure those VDI environments?
Well, securing VDI environments, it's kind of like securing any other system. You got to have a multi-layered approach. First things first, we need to focus on access control.
So making sure the right people have the keys to the right virtual desktops.
Exactly. We need to use strong authentication to make sure we know who is trying to access the VDI environment. That could be anything from strong passwords to multi-factor authentication, even biometric methods.
Right, so strong locks on the doors of our virtual office. But what about once somebody is inside? What about protecting the data inside the VDI environment itself?
Yeah, data protection is essential. We have to protect that sensitive information both when it's moving across the network and when it's just sitting there in the VDI environment. So we're talking encryption for data in transit and at rest. We also need to think about data loss prevention, making sure nothing sensitive leaves the VDI environment without permission.
So it's not just about who gets in, it's about what they can do with the data once they're there. Like having security cameras and alarms inside our virtual office to watch for any funny business.
I like that. And don't forget about network security. VDI environments often use shared networks, so we need to make sure that traffic is properly segmented and protected. That's where firewalls, intrusion detection systems, and other network security measures come in.
So it's like creating secure pathways inside that virtual office building, making sure data flows smoothly but securely between different departments, keeping out any unauthorized visitors.
Exactly. And just like any other system, those regular security updates and patches are crucial. Got to keep those VDI environments up to date to protect against any new vulnerabilities or threats that pop up.
Okay, so it's about layering these security measures, authentication, data protection, network security, regular updates to create a strong defense for our VDI environment.
You got it. And for those of you studying for the CCSP exam, remember it's not just about knowing what these security best practices are, it's about understanding why they're important. You need to be able to explain the risks associated with BDI and how to mitigate them effectively.
This has been a fantastic journey through the world of virtualization. We've gone from the basics all the way to those nitty-gritty security details. I feel like I've got a much better grasp on how it all works and how important it is to approach it with security in mind from the start.
I agree. Virtualization is such a crucial part of cloud computing, and understanding its security implications is essential for anyone working in this field, especially if you're going for that CCSP certification.
For all of you out there preparing for the CCSP exam, we hope this deep dive has been helpful and given you a strong foundation for those virtualization questions. Keep learning, keep exploring, and keep the security gears turning.
And remember, technology never stands still. New challenges and opportunities are always coming up, so continuous learning and adaptation are key to staying ahead of the curve.
That's right, so keep diving deep, keep asking questions, and never stop learning. Thanks for joining us on this virtualization adventure. Until next time, stay secure.